Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. Today is a special bonus episode. This comes from an Instagram live I did about a week ago. So without further ado, hope you enjoy. Well, hello there, friends. My name's Justin Lewis from How to Be a Better DM. I'm a podcast host, and our podcast is about how to be a better DM. Fancy that. Well, in all honesty, we talk about different methods and ways to improve your gameplay, right? To have a more fun experience without spending extra time, extra money, or extra effort to be a better dungeon master. I know, fancy that, right? Also, I do want to note that I'm wearing the Dead Wars veteran hat from our Dead Wars booth earlier this year. If you want one of these, you can go to sessionzerostudios.com and get one. But today, I want to talk to you, all you sick people out there, about world building. Also, I gotta say, I'm pretty happy that I finally figured out my technology stack for this Instagram live. The last two times I've done this, the tech has been terrible. So I am pretty pleased with myself that finally I have it where I want it to be. So let's talk about world building. We all love world building. And let's be frank, if you are a dungeon master, chances are you got into being a dungeon master because of your love of world building, right? We all there's something about creation and pure creation, because I think that's what world building is, where you just imagine endless possibilities and you create them, and it's super fun, right? However, I'm here to tell you something pretty unfortunate for most of you out there, including myself, but your world building has to be player and character centric. Oh, what does that mean? That's a very harsh thing to say, especially for people like myself who have spent so much time creating all this content, right? So I guess the behind the scenes story of this is I'm working on my own homebrew world. It's called Integrity, and frankly, I have only really been doing one shots here and there. I've been trying to kind of suss out the major plot, but I figured out my main problem is that I haven't really honed in on the players and or characters that will be playing in this campaign. So when you world build, you need to world build in a way that it is focused on your players and their characters, okay? So first, let's talk about why, and then let's talk about how, okay? So first thing is, when you world build for your characters and your players, it will give your world building so much more direction. You won't just be building continents and countries for the fun of it. Instead, you'll be building those things to drive a story forward. And that story is going to be custom tailored to your players. And that's important, because at the end of the day, that's why we're dungeon masters, right? We're not dungeon masters to make cool stuff. Otherwise, you would just make cool stuff. You wouldn't let other people play in your world, but instead you want other people to dive into what you create and enjoy it. And the reason why I'm kind of bringing this part up is over the weekend, I had an interview with Comedy Sports in Provo. So shout out to them. Hey. But I had an interview with TJ from Comedy Sports, and it was awesome because he reminded me that at the end of the day, being a dungeon master is all about your players, right? I mean, to some extent, it's about you, but if you're kind of the right dungeon master, you get your enjoyment from seeing your players awed and filled with wonder at what you've made. So that's reason number one, why you should world build with your players in mind. Reason number two is it actually saves you time. So essentially, because you're building specifically for your players, you don't really need to do that much more above what your players interact with, right? Obviously, you want to be able to make up stuff on the spot or pull things from the lore when your party finds out about it. But in all reality, you only need to world build about 20% to maybe 40% more than what your players are going to interact with, right? So, and you can think of this a little bit like Minecraft or video games. Video games render what is, hey, Heroes of Evermore, thanks for joining. But video games often render, they render what is immediately around the person playing the game. And in world building, that's exactly kind of what you need to do, right? You don't need to create the continent on the other side of the planet that the party will never interact with. You just don't need to. Happy Wednesday. Hey. So to catch you up, I am talking about world building specifically for players, right? And first of all, I'm talking about why you should do that. So right now, I just mentioned that you only really need to world build about 40% more than what your players are going to interact with, right? And that gives them the ability to kind of explore and uncover things that they think you might be making up on the spot, but really you've planned. Also, this allows you to make things up on the spot for them, okay? The second reason why you world build with players and characters in mind is because it allows you to add cool stuff as you're going along. Because you're not going to fill up the entire game, and actually, Heroes of Evermore, exactly right. So for those of you who are listening on the podcast later on, when I put this on our podcast, homebrew DMs always get caught up in flushing out the whole world before starting a campaign, and it's almost crippling. That's coming from Heroes of Evermore, who is on with us on Instagram Live. You work 8 hours a day. You spend time with your family, and when you come home, you do work around the house. And it seems that you never have as much time as you would like to prepare for your D&D sessions. Does this sound like you? Wouldn't it be amazing to have endless material prepared for your D&D sessions anyways? That's where Roll and Play Press comes in. Roll and Play Press provides D&D 5e compatible material for any type of session. Running a one-shot? Check out their One-Shot Wonders book with over 100 one-shot ideas. Getting started with a new sci-fi campaign? Get their Game Master's Sci-Fi Toolkit to have your games much more prepared with much less effort. Why reinvent the wheel? Check out Roll and Play Press at rollandplaypress.com, see what they have to offer, and get a 10% discount when you buy something by using the code BETTERDM10, that's BETTERDM10 at checkout. Give yourself just a little bit extra help so that you can continue being the world's greatest dungeon master. And that's absolutely true. And that's actually one thing that I think I've struggled with, right? Personally, with the homebrew campaign setting I'm building right now, is you spend so much time trying to create this perfect world, but it's not alive. As much as you work on it, it's sort of this lifeless husk until you put players and characters in it. They start acting and reacting with certain things, and the things that you've already made start coming alive, and you get to make cool new things, right? So as your players explore and dive into things, you'll be forced to make up some things, and because of the work that you've done, you'll be able to connect that with the world at large, but you'll also be able to just kind of think on the fly and enjoy the process of creation mid-game, adding to your world, right? So if you, and I guess let me back up, that's going to happen regardless of how much prep you do beforehand. In every single Dungeons and Dragons game I've ever played, the Dungeon Master adds to the story, adds to the setting, because the players are playing in it. Actually, Heroes of Evermore, that is my next big point. So for the podcast listeners later, he says, integrating player backstories is a beautiful thing to add on as you go. And actually, one reason why I would recommend world building specific to players and characters is that so you can incorporate backstories. So one example, the first campaign that I dungeon mastered ever, it started out as Princes of the Apocalypse, right? And I had all of my players make pretty interesting or at least try to make interesting backstories. One of my players made a really cool and interesting backstory that involved him being essentially a barbarian from, nomadic tribes in the north that were adopted into they were adopted into the royal family of this nation that he just completely made up. He called it the Kingdom of the Golden Stag. And as a new DM, I was like, we're playing in Faerun. I guess there's now a new nation called the Kingdom of the Golden Stag, and I had to put that somewhere. When you're world building, it's much easier because you can just incorporate that stuff into your world, and it kind of takes some of the heavy lifting off of your shoulders and allows the players to have some ownership of the world. Not just that, but the world by itself is boring, no matter how much cool stuff you put into it. Once you get story and conflict going, that's when it becomes interesting and fun. And interesting and fun, that phrase is kind of an interesting and fun phrase to use because it implies that it's interesting and fun to someone. So very much by the definition of your world is cool or your world is fun, it is implying that it's fun and cool to someone, aka your players. So you need to world build with your players and your characters in mind because you'll allow them to have ownership of the world, you'll instill their backstories into the world, and frankly, it'll save you a lot of time. So that's why you world build in a character player-centric way. Let's talk about some ways how to do that, right? Because obviously your world needs some backbones, right? You need to create the general layout of the world. You need to create the continents and whatnot, all the nations. But as soon as you can, get your players started on creating their characters. They're going to ask you questions like, what are some of the most important nations? What are some of the gods? What are the races like? As they ask these questions, that will allow you to understand what you need to world build for them. Again, that's how you make it player and character centric. They only pay attention to the things that they're interested in. So one thing Heroes of Evermore did share, one thing I wanted to do immediately was share the world map I made with my players, but I held off so I could add on as I go. I supplied town maps first. That is an excellent suggestion. Because, for the most part, most campaigns start at lower levels, unless you start at a higher level, in which case the campaign's going to be kind of short, naturally. But if you start at lower levels, your party is really only going to be in small, specified regions. They're not going to travel continent to continent for the most part. Obviously, you could do some pretty kooky things, but that is in your favor because, in this case, just like Heroes of Evermore has said, you don't need to share the map of the world with your party. Wouldn't it be nice to gamify your Dungeon Master abilities? In D&D, characters can reach level 20, so why can't Dungeon Masters? We're happy to tell you that now you can. We created the Dungeon Master Level Up Guide for you. It's a simple tool to gamify your progression to higher and higher levels of Dungeon Mastery. It includes Dungeon Master levels 1 to 20 with associated XP requirements, as well as a long list of Dungeon Master activities that will give you XP to get you to level 20. Each activity has a challenge rating and an XP amount. In order to level up, all you need to do is find out how much XP you currently have, find out how much you need, and then pick activities to get you there. You can get the Dungeon Master Level Up Guide for free by going to sessionzerostudios.com/newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter once you get there, and we'll email you the Level Up Guide in the first email. Finally, leveling up as a DM can be as fun as leveling up a character. And in fact, you might not even share that ever, because depending on your world, that might not exist. If you share very specific maps of localized regions, that again helps you world build in a way that is concentric on your players, concentrated on your players, because, like I said, you only need to do about 20 to 40% extra above what your players are going to interact with. So if you have one region, you focus on that region, you really flesh out that one specific region, your party's hanging out in that. While you're doing that, you can start working on some of the regions around it. So those are two ways to do it in a very party or player and character centric way. The third way is constantly be in your players or your characters' backstories. Learn about their backstories, because those might spark ideas for you to add things into the game, right? For example, my wife in our campaign, my wife's character ended up getting petrified, right? And when that happened, I had her bring in her wife's character's brother. Thank you so much, Heroes of Evermore, for coming. It's always a pleasure to have you listen and hang out with us. Anyways, my wife's character got petrified, so she started playing as her character's brother. Because her character's brother had sort of been separated from her character or when they were younger, I had to think about what her character's brother was doing, what cities he was going to, what characters he was interacting with, which builds on the world. And really, world building, people get so excited about it. You don't necessarily need to hate it. You don't need to love it. It is a fun thing to do. But if you do it with your players and your characters in mind, it's so much easier, because everything has a purpose. And necessity is the mother of invention, right? When you have to figure out something, you do. And when you have to be creative, you do. When you don't have to be, it's a lot harder to sort of think up, what do I work on next? So thank you for joining me here. Hopefully you enjoyed this Instagram live session of how to be a better DM. If you want to, you can listen to this later on our podcast, How to Be Better DM. I've been your host, Justin Lewis, and until next time, let's go ahead and roll initiative.